please.
Yeah, thank you very much for introducing me, as well as what I have done in the past few decades. I'm very pleased to give a lecture about our recent work in the South Caucasus, which focuses on investigating the Neolithization processes of the Southern Caucasus in relation to the Neolithic of the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. So our field is in is Azerbaijan, which is oh, sorry, one of the countries in the southern South Caucasus. And I will I'm going to present our I'm going to present the results of our field work in that region to present what we found through our own field work. I'm sorry, this is it. Yes. The South Caucasus is not far from the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, but the Neolithization processes of that region have remained not well understood until a few decades ago. But in these decades, just say, I would say after the 2000, a lot of important progresses has been made to understand the Neolithization processes of that regions. And our work has been one of those important progresses, I think. Okay. And I'm going to make reference to the results of our field work at 3 sites, which are Gyoitepe, Haji Elam Hanlu Tepe, and Damjiri. These 3 sites represent different phases of the Neolithizations in these regions. Gyoitepe is Gyoitepe represents the developed phase of the Neolithic. Haji Elam Hanlu Tepe represents one of the oldest Neolithic site in the region, and Damsel Cave contains a good sequence from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic. The site of Damziri has a cultural deposit of both periods, the Mesolithic and Neolithic. Therefore, the results from the investigations at these 3 sites represent these 3 sites give us a very good opportunity to understand how the Mesolithic societies in these regions became farming society in this region. Okay. Yeah, I will sorry, this is it. Yes. Then I will briefly introduce our investigations at these 3 sites in a chronological order. I mean, by a chronological order, I mean our own order of investigations. So the first site we started working in this region was Gyoitepe. This is one of the largest Neolithic settlements in West Azerbaijan, in the middle Kura Valley. It's Is it? Hmm? It doesn't work. Hmm? Oh, yes. Hmm. Sorry, excuse me. It's, hmm. Yes, yes. Goitepe is one of the largest Neolithic settlement in the middle Kura Valley of West Azerbaijan. Uh, it was discovered a long time ago in the 1950s by Idiar Narimanov as a Neolithic site, but the substantial excavations started only in the beginning of the 2000. And Farhad Guliyev and I uh, conducted a series of excavations of this large Neolithic sites. As you see, it's mm, yeah, the excavations revealed plenty of well-preserved mud brick wall buildings. The site contained successive occurrences of 14 mud brick building levels within the 11 meters thick cultural deposits, as you see. Sorry. Okay. Excuse me. It's mhm. Excuse me. Mhm. Excuse me. It doesn't work. Mhm. Mhm. Well. Mhm.
Can I help you with something?
Well, yes, the PowerPoint does not proceed.
I understand.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, we identified at least 14 levels of occupations oops, at this site, and a series of radiocarbon dating for each of these levels uh, demonstrated that this site was occupied in a relatively short period in the middle of the, wow, this PowerPoint is not correct. The site was occupied in the middle of the 6th millennium BC instead of, as written here, 6,640 to 6,450, but it should be 5,640 to 5,450. But anyway, so this site represents the developed stage of the Neolithic with pottery. Then we the target of our research was to investigate the origin of the Neolithic in this region. We wanted to discover an even older site in this region. Then what we discovered was Haji Elamhanlu Tepe, which is not far from the site of Gyoi Tepe, only say 1.5 kilometers far from the site. It's a much smaller site and represents a low mound. When we discovered this site, we thought this one was pre-ceramic period, pre-ceramic Neolithic site, because we didn't find any piece of pottery at this site. But after our excavations, we found this was also a pottery Neolithic site. But the occurrence of pottery was very, very rare, and the associated archaeological material was also with a very primitive nature of the Neolithic. And finally, we identified this site is one of the oldest Neolithic site in this region, right? Say, one of the interesting features of this site is concerned with its architecture. As you see, the architecture is made of mud brick walls, and their plan is in circular as at Göteborg, but the configuration of the architecture at this site is very much different from what we found at Göteborg. I will address to this issue later as well. And then we made a series of radiocarbon dating at this site of Haji Elamhanlu Tepe, and it was discovered and it was found to represent one of the earliest farming settlements in this region, occupied between a period of 5,950 to 5,800 calibrated BC as written here. What was very interesting was the discovery of, say, as you see, very fine made imported ceramics with painted. We believe this fine painted pottery was not a local product, but was imported most probably from the, say, northern part of the Middle East. And it's a good piece of evidence to have for the cultural interaction with the Fertile Crescent at the beginning of the Neolithic in this region. Okay, then what's next? The Haji Elamhanlu was okay because it was found to be one of the oldest Neolithic site in this region. But then our question, our research interest goes to an earlier period to understand how the local, supposed to be, how the local hunter-gatherers of the Mesolithic period became the farming societies in this period. To understand that process, we have to investigate even earlier sites than the Haji Elam route. Then we investigated, say, archives of the Neolithic and other prehistoric research in this region in the Soviet Union period at the institute in Baku, uh, including the photographs or unpublished archives and the materials, as you see here. Then finally, we chose the region of Gaza to study the possible archaeological sites older than the Haji El Amhanlu. The region we chose for fieldwork is the Abbey Mountain, as you see here. This picture was taken from a homepage of the Ministry of Tourism of Azerbaijan. The mountain of Abbey is located in western part of Azerbaijan, very close to the Armenian border. It is well known with a series of limestone caves and water springs. This is a good place of tourists, in fact. Let's say the explanation of this region says there are about 30 artificial caves from Paleolithic times. Artificial caves, you mean, say, the caves occupied by human beings in the prehistoric times. So according to this description, as well as the archives stored at the Institute of Archaeology in Baku, we chose this mountain to look for possible very early Neolithic or Mesolithic sites in this region. Okay. Right, this is the Google Earth view. This is Abbey Mountains, and blue points indicate caves we identified during the survey in 2015. But as the signboard for this that for this mountain for the tourist, there are, in fact, we also identified about 30 caves and rock shelters. But most of them, or actually say almost all of them, are caves and rock shelters occupied only in recently. I mean, we never found any old Paleolithic or Neolithic occupation traces of them. But there was only one cave that can possibly contain occupation of the Paleolithic or Neolithic period. It is indicated in a red point here for location 435. This is the Damsel Cave. This cave was excavated once in 1956 and 1957 in the Soviet Union period. This cave is located at the foothill of this mountain range. Yeah, according to the preliminary report of that period, this cave, the excavations of this cave yielded, say, Middle Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic, and Bronze Age, and say other archaeological objects in a mixed context. We confirmed the artifact assemblages at the institute in Baku, but say we as this cave was the only site with such a wide range of chronological range of archaeological objects, and we decided to investigate this cave again. Okay. So the rest of this lecture will be about the results of our investigations at Damsel Cave, the second part of this talk. So what we see here is a general overview of the Damsel Cave. And this cave is in a national cultural reserve to preserve the landscape as well as the cultural heritage in this region. Therefore, this cave is you see covered with a lot of greens. So no shepherds are allowed to come in this region. Okay, so this is a general view of the Damsel Cave. It is about 70 meters wide and 2 to 5 meters deep, and it has worked as one of the important places for touristic spots. Yeah. Right. Right. So yes, because this is a good touristic place, there are plenty of cottages or huts, as you see here, and every day a lot of people come to this place for lunch or barbecues, especially for kebabs. The place, this place is covered with these huts and asphalt plates. So it's not easy to excavate among the tourists and these busy constructions. But nevertheless, this was the only place that we identified to be able to discover old Neolithic or Mesolithic occupations. In fact, our excavation started in a narrow area to avoid the touristic constructions and asphalted places like here, small area along the cave wall. I say the result was very good. In fact, we discovered what we wanted. And then finally, after a few years, a few years after we started our excavations, one of the kebab hut was removed by the local authority for our excavations to make a bigger exposure to understand the early history of this cave. Do you see? Yes, this is a general plan of the Damsel Cave. The main area close to the spring was already nearly completely excavated in the 1950s. Our excavation was conducted in the area indicated by a red square here. Right. So the excavations we conducted between 2015 and 2019 were still in a small area, but the excavation yielded significant stratigraphic data on the Mesolithic to the Neolithic cultural transition. Mm-hmm. Right. We excavated about 5 meters deep from the present surface, and the stratigraphy was divided into these 6 phases. From the top, medieval or Islamic period, Bronze Age, Chalcolithic, Neolithic, Mesolithic, and at the bottom there was a layer of the Middle Paleolithic. According to the preliminary report of the Soviet Union's previous excavations in the 1950s, so all the archaeological materials from different periods were discovered in a mixed context. But in our excavation area, these materials of different periods were found in a stratigraphic order. There was no trace of mixing. And what important was we discovered a stratified occurrence of the Neolithic and Mesolithic in units 4 and 5. Say in these photographs, you see the deposits of units 4 and 5 are indicated in a little bit dark color. So we will focus to report what we found from these 2 units. Yes, this is a section drawing of the excavation trench. What important is the stratigraphic occurrences of unit 4 and 5, which represent a good sequence from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic. Right. So this is a occupation at the cave. So we cannot expect to find mud brick walled buildings as at mound sites in the plain. Instead, the architectural remains we discovered at this cave are made only with, say, stones. stone fragmented stones and some fireplaces. Maybe you cannot identify how different the stone construction of the Mesolithic from the stone walls of the Neolithic. But it's, let's say, one of the important differences between these two different periods is the occurrence of a cobble filled pit, as you see here from the Mesolithic layer. This one is probably a cooking facility in the Neolithic and very popular in the Middle East as well. And we also found the same type of copper-filled pits at Haji Elam Hanlu as well. But we did not find it in the Mesolithic levels at Damsel Cave. Then stone tools also give us a good idea how the material culture differs between the Mesolithic and the Neolithic. As you see here, the stone artifacts in the Neolithic shows a larger size than the stone tools of the Mesolithic. And the use of obsidian became more popular in the Neolithic. And the hunting tools in the Neolithic period are almost uniformly represented by trapezies like these. But in the Mesolithic layer, you have lithic artifacts made in a smaller size, and the use of obsidian is less common, and the hunting tools shows a bigger variety, including not only trapezies, but lunettes and choke points. The choke points are indicated in a red square here. This is a quite unique stone artifacts in Azerbaijan. I don't know any other site with this type of points in Azerbaijan, but wait. But in the northern Caucasus at Dage, the cave in Chok in the northern Caucasus, this type of points, hunting tools are known in the Mesolithic period. And therefore, in the Mesolithic period, the communities of the Middle Kura probably was included in the same cultural interaction sphere with the Northern Caucasus. But this is anyway a unique discovery of the research of Mesolithic and Neolithic of this region. And then we see a clear difference between the Mesolithic and Neolithic in subsistence remains. These two graphs shows differences in botanical remains. As you see in the botanical assemblages of the Mesolithic, you do not see the serial remains. The serial remains occurred in the Neolithic in a very small, in a low proportion. But anyway, there is. Say, as the Damsel Cave is a cave occupation at the foothills of a mountain, we do not expect to find much trace of cereal consumption. But anyway, there is some evidence of the use of cereal in the Neolithic period at least. And about the animal remains, we see a better picture of difference between the Mesolithic and Neolithic. As we expected, in the Mesolithic assemblage of animal remains, we have more, say, more, or actually all the animals we identified in the Mesolithic assemblages were wild animals, especially gazelle and deer, characteristic of this period. And in the Neolithic faunal assemblage, a large portion of the assemblage was occupied by the obvious capura. And what important is there is the first evidence of consumption of goat in the Neolithic layer. The goat was absent from the Mesolithic assemblage, but they appeared for the first time in the Neolithic. We believe it was imported from the south, I mean the Fertile Crescent. Mm-hmm. Yes. So the assemblage composition changed as the Neolithic assemblage now include the goat. Say the obvious, I mean, the sheep bones were present both in the Mesolithic and Neolithic, but their size showed a clear change. Yeah, remember the number of measured sheep bones were very small. Nevertheless, from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic levels of this cave, the sheep bones became significantly smaller, and the size of sheep bones from the Neolithic period of Damsel Cave is almost the same as that of Haji, Elamhanlu, and Gyoitepe. We believe the sheep we discovered at the Neolithic level of Damjiri was domesticated as at Haji, Elamhanlu, and Gyoitepe. So I showed how the archaeological finds from the Mesolithic and Neolithic levels of this cave differed at Damjiri. What is interesting is the series of radiocarbon dates, as you see here from this cave. The Mesolithic levels represent the late 7th millennium BC, and the Neolithic represent the early 6th millennium BC. And what's important is there is almost no time gap between the Mesolithic and Neolithic. The stone artifacts are different. The subsistence technologies are also different, but the radiocarbon dates are not very different. I mean, we are not able to identify chronological gap in the radiocarbon chronology. Right. So this is quite unique in the archaeology of the South Caucasus. There are several important Neolithic sites in this region with sufficient number of radiocarbon dates, including Göitepe, Arhuro of Georgia, Mentesh of West Azerbaijan, Kichiktepe, also Azerbaijan, Akunashen of Armenia, Haji El Amhanlu Tepe, and Damsel Cave. All the previously known Neolithic sites, like Göitepe to Haji El Amhanlu, started their occupations at around 6000 BC. But at Damsel Cave, you have a longer sequence. Not only the Neolithic period of the 6th millennium BC, but it has a late 7th millennium BC of the Mesolithic period. This is the first, so this cave gave us the first opportunity to understand the Mesolithic to Neolithic transition or replacement at a single site. So we started the field investigations in this region from Göitepe first, and then Haji El Amhanlu, and then we reached Damjili to complete the sequence to understand the Mesolithic to the Neolithic transition. Yeah. Right. So, we have obtained now three important key sites to understand this cultural process. And the major question is continuity or replacement. The Neolithic economy was probably imported from the Middle East. But when the Neolithic economy was imported or brought in, there were already hunter-gatherers communities of the Mesolithic way of life in this region. And how did they interact, or how one was replaced by each other? That is a main question of our research. Relatively easy answer is made for the subsistence technology. Crops and livestock were most likely imported. In terms of wheat and barley, the South Caucasus is a little bit far from the main distribution region of wild progenitors of these crops. And I mentioned goat bones appeared in the Neolithic levels only. The goat we have made ancient mitochondrial DNA analysis of goat bones from Haji Elamhandu Tepe and Joy Tepe, and our result shows the Neolithic goats of West Azerbaijan had the same haplotype of mitochondrial DNA with the domesticated goats of West Asia instead of possible wild goats in the Caucasus. Probably the Neolithic goats in this region were brought in from the Middle East. So the subsistence technology was probably imported from the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. But what is interesting is the cultural assemblages of the South Caucasus Neolithic showed some form of continuity from the Mesolithic. But the cultural assemblies do not show a complete replacement. So I will show the first piece of evidence for the continuity. So this graph was already published in a journal article. When we compared the frequency of ceramics in the Neolithic sites in this region, in the early Neolithic period represented by Haji Elamhanlu Tepe, the occurrence of ceramics is very, very low, indicated in black in this graph. And the ceramics became increased only after, only in during the late Neolithic phase in this region, as represented by Gyoitepe. And also interesting is the occurrence of imported painted ceramics, as shown here, occurred only in the earliest phase of the Neolithic. And this pattern was confirmed at Damsel Cave, as you see here. In the Mesolithic levels of Unit 5, of course, there is no ceramics. And in the early Neolithic phase, the ceramic is very, very, you see, the ceramics are present, but in a very low proportion, and they became common only in the late Neolithic. Mm. Yes. So the pattern we already discovered in the study of Gyoitepe and Haji Lamhanlu was confirmed in a single sequence of the Damjiri cave. This is one thing, one piece of evidence to show the continuity from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic. I mean, the, the way of life without using ceramics continued in the early Neolithic. The second piece of evidence for the continuity between the Mesolithic and Neolithic is the use of obsidian Obsidian artifacts are quite well known for the Neolithic period. And the use of obsidian was already common in the Mesolithic period, but the proportion is not as high as in the late Neolithic. At the Damsel Cave, the use of obsidian in the Mesolithic period is about, say, 50% of the entire lithic artifacts, and the proportion became, uh, say, increasing rather gradually. The oldest Neolithic site of Arjelam Hanru is close to the Mesolithic of Damjili rather than the Neolithic of Gyoitepe. Okay. The third evidence of continuity is also from the study of stone artifacts. Mesolithic type of artifact survived in a different form during the early Neolithic. These stone tools were the artifact discovered at Damjil Cave. In the Mesolithic period, there is an unique tool called Cumlo tools. Cumlo tools were first defined at the Cumlo cave in Armenia, but they are almost they they show almost the same typological characteristics as Chayun tools, very well known in the Anatolia and northern Mesopotamian Neolithic. This photo was taken from one of my own archives from the excavations in Syria. And in the Neolithic period, this particular tool type disappeared, but they probably survived in a different form. Qumran tools were made only on obsidian in the Mesolithic period, but they are, say, different type of the same kind of type, but different tools in the Neolithic were made on flint as well, and the pressure retouch was not so steep as in the Mesolithic, less steep pressuring retouch. We we published these unique forms of Qumran tools of the Neolithic as Damjili tools. But anyway, there is some continuation of tool manufacturing from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic. And also we see a continuity in the tool composition. The Mesolithic toolkit was not replaced completely by the Neolithic assemblages. Hunting tools, the proportion of hunting tools sharply dropped from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic. But in the early Neolithic assemblages of Haji Ramhandu, the proportion of hunting tools is higher than in the later Neolithic. And also interesting is the occurrence of heavy scraping tools, scrapers represent one of the major tool types in the Mesolithic, and they became less common in the Neolithic. But in the early Neolithic period of Haji Ramahan Tepe, the proportion is relatively high. I think the early Neolithic of Haji Ramahan Tepe represents, say, transitional phase between the Mesolithic and the late Neolithic type of lithic assemblages. And ornaments, you see, the Mesolithic type of ornaments made on wild boars, wild boar tusks were in use during the early Neolithic. The photo you see here is an ornament discovered at the Damsel Neolithic, and similar ornaments were discovered at the Haji Ramhanru Tepe, as you see from number 1 to 3, but not at Gyoy Tepe. And yeah, I skipped it, right. So I showed the subsistence technology changed from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic, but the cultural assemblages showed continuity from the Mesolithic to Neolithic. And the change from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic occurred in a very short period. This is a rather paradox. As we see in this radiocarbon analysis, we do not see big gap between the Mesolithic and Neolithic. Nevertheless, the subsistence changed, that the cultural assemblages or tool-making technologies show the continuity. How was this change made possible? This is the major question we study. Excuse me. Mm. Mm. It doesn't go. Mm. Yes. Yes, okay. To interpret what happened at this stage of change from the Mesolithic to Neolithic, I will mention more or less similar situations in, in the prehistory of Japan, which so there was no indigenous Neolithic period in the Japanese archipelago, but farming technology was introduced from either Korea or China, anyway from the Asian continents, about 3000 BP, quite late. Say the rice farming was introduced quite swiftly in one of the southern islands of Japan, but then it moved. The acceptance of rice farming in the rest of the islands took much more years. Why one of the islands in Japan accepted rice farming so swiftly, it was it has been considered the Mesolithic communities in this island had already established steady cultural interaction with the south part of the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, when rice farming reached at the South Korean Peninsula, uh, this subsistence technology was introduced to the southern island almost simultaneously, about 3000 BP. So this one suggests the cultural interactions in the Pure farming period made an important role in transmitting the new subsistence technology. Yeah, the same thing is written here. Cultural exchange between the Korean Peninsula and the Kyushu Island in the pre-farming period may have facilitated the swift acceptance of rice farming to the German hunter-gatherer society. So the cultural exchange in the pre-farming period is represented by the production of more or less similar ceramic style. And this this type of pre-farming cultural contact between the South Caucasus and the fertile crescent of Southwest Asia is identified in the stone tool technology, for example. So we already saw the occurrence of Qumran tools, which look like very much similar to the Chayun tools of the Middle East. The communities in the Middle East manufacturing Chayun tools were completely farmers, food producers, and those making Qumran tools in the South Caucasus were hunter-gatherers, but they must have had cultural interactions uh, in the same period, although they depended on their subsistence on different technology. And also interesting is the changing pattern of lithic tool shapes. In this case, the shape of hunting tools. This graph shows how the shape of a hunting tool changed from the Mesolithic to the late Neolithic in the South Caucasus. As you see in the Mesolithic of the Damgiri assemblages in the late 7th millennium BC, uh, the the width is longer, which is width, but anyway, uh, the width is bigger than the height in this period. But then this form became little by little to have less width than the height in the late Neolithic. So this pattern occurred in the South Caucasus. But we already know the same type of change occurred in the Iranian Zagros in the same period from the late 7th millennium BC to the 6th millennium BC. Ishigaki 2013. This should be read Nishiaki. Ishigaki. Anyway, between the South Caucasus and the Iranian Zagros, the same type of change in the hunting, lithic hunting tools forms occurred. I don't think this was just by a coincidence, but the people in the Mesolithic South Caucasus had a lot of interactions with the people, with the Neolithic people communities in the south already. They had established, they probably established such steady cultural connections, even though the Mesolithic people in the South Caucasus did not practice farming in the Mesolithic period. All right. Okay. Then another thing, when we consider the introduction of new subsistence technology in one region, we may suppose the people who conduct farming and the communities continuing conducting hunting and gathering may have occupied different habitats in the region. In that case, for example, farmers occupied the plain and hunter-gatherers occupied the mountains. If this kind of say this kind of different habitat use was established, these two communities conducting different subsistence economies and continued to survive for years. But this was not the case in the South Caucasus, at least in the middle Kura Valley. I think this was because the habitats of the early Neolithic communities and the Mesolithic communities overlapped. Neolithic communities in the plain already frequently exploited mountain resources as well. For example, we discovered plenty of deer antlers tools at Neolithic site in the plain. Deer antlers were available only in the mountains, obviously. And also obsidian. Plenty of obsidian was imported to the Neolithic settlement, and obsidian in this region was available only from the mountain to the south. Therefore, the incoming Neolithic communities, or incoming or local or anyway, the early Neolithic communities did not stay in the plain alone, but they included the mountain regions as resource exploitation regions, areas. Therefore, I suppose Neolithic farmers and Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, you see, did not how can I say, their subsistence competed. That's what I mean. So So this is the final slide of my talk. The South Caucasian Neolithic should be regarded as one of the periphery groups of the East Wing communities of the Fertile Crescent. East Wing communities, I mean the eastern half of the Fertile Crescent. The communities of the eastern part of the Fertile Crescent had the steady cultural interactions with the Mesolithic communities of the Caucasus. And the Neolithizations of the South Caucasus was a function of the region's historical and ecological processes of the 7th to the 6th millennium interface period. The Neolithic was probably brought in from the Fertile Crescent to the South Caucasus. But it was it was made very swiftly and rapidly. But this was because of the pre-farming, the interaction of the pre-farming period, as well as the particular ecological conditions of the South Caucasus. That what we thought after investigations of the 3 sites in West Azerbaijan, Yoitepe, Hajeram, and Tepe, and especially Damsel Cave. Yes. The results of our excavations at Yoitepe and Hajeram Tepe have been recently published in monographs, and then hopefully we publish the results of the Damsel Cave research as well, and not far in the future. Okay, thank you very much. This is the end of my talk.
Thank you. Thank you for this fascinating talk. Really, these three sites really allow to draw a panorama of this complex phenomenon. It's really amazing. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. There already a question